Michelle, it is so great to have you on the podcast. I've been a longtime fan of yours, and we've just talked about all the great things that make you who you are, your bio. But I just wanted to say, one, how are you doing today? Welcome to the podcast. Let's start there. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. We've been long fans of each other. Okay. I'm just happy to be in this space. Thank you.
Likewise, it's going to be a mutual admiration society for the next couple of minutes that we spend together. And part of the reason why I have just been such a big fan of yours is, of course, we're both interested in burnout and really passionate about it, and for Black women specifically. But I wanted to hear a little bit more to get us started about, who's Michelle? And then, what's been your journey through burnout and why you now focus on it? Because this is kind of like one of your sole focuses for your practice, for your life, externally, internally. So tell us about that. Who's Michelle? And tell us a little bit about your journey with burnout.
Yeah. First and foremost, I'm a Black woman who is recovering from professional burnout. I am a Midwesterner living in the South, and I'm a mom of a really cool toddler. I mean, he's so funny. He's so hilarious, has all kinds of jokes, and does not want to be referred to as a baby. He's not a little baby. That's new. That's new for mom. I am somebody who absolutely loves reading. I know we had talked about reading a little bit. I'm a huge fan. I prefer the springtime. That's my favorite season. My birthday is also in that season, but I also love Christmas time. That's my favorite holiday. Okay. I'm somebody who's way more than just what she does for a living.
Yes.
It is part of my burnout recovery process to make sure I introduce myself without saying what I do first, because that's not who I am first. But professionally, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm somebody who loves helping people in the therapeutic space, and I have my own private practice called the Essence of Healing LLC, and I'm also helping folks on their restorative self-care journey and burnout recovery journey with G. Michelle Wellness.
Love that. So, and I love that too. I think there's so much when we talk about, we'll get to this, particularly when we talk about identity and burnout, that really that's the first step, is understanding who you are outside of work. And we're in a world that just, when you say introduce yourself, it's Kelly, I am a, and then you proceed to talk about what you do for a living. And then maybe what you like might come later, or not even at all in the conversation. So thank you for kicking us off to that. We're going to circle back around to that piece a little later. I want to start with talking about what brings you to this work specifically. I know you said you're recovering your own self from burnout. So maybe a little bit about that story and that journey that then brought you to specializing and focusing on burnout.
Yeah. I actually started my social work journey with helping folks who were surviving domestic violence and intimate partner violence. That's actually how I got interested in social work to begin with. I started my career as a children's counselor, and when you're working with kids, you're also working with parents and caregivers.
Yes.
And I remember working with children exposed to domestic violence and intimate partner violence. This really transformed my ideas of how to help folks, because what I like to say in that work is we're in the healthy relationship business. Okay, we're not just focused on the parts of relationships that are violent, abusive, and unhealthy. We also want to talk about healthy relationships. And the more work that I did with individuals, families, schools, groups, I learned that so many of us are working towards having a healthy relationship with ourselves. So that's where I started my self-care for myself and for others. Because in the same breath, within the first 6 months of me working full-time, I was completely burnt out. Physically, mentally, spiritually drained. I couldn't tell the difference between work and my personal life. I had very brittle boundaries, if they were existent at all. I constantly thought about work. It was all consuming in my life. And I remember being in session when I was a children's counselor with a little kid. And I remember them looking up at me and going, "Miss Michelle, are you okay?" I don't care how many times I talk about that story. I always have to pause and kind of check my own breathing, because I remember how I felt in that moment and how that really made me focus on, wait a minute, how can I take care of me? because at that moment, I had a perpetual cold. I'm coughing, but I'm thinking, oh, it's more important for me to show up than to rest and care for myself. So that's how I started with self-care. And over the years, especially the last 4 or 5 years, it has transformed into not just talking about self-care, but also how do you recover from experiences of burnout, specifically professional burnout. It's truly been a transformation in my work.
Yeah, I think you end up there, right? I really love the journey of one, as a fellow social worker, I totally understand that. You go head first into the work and you just, get your cape, you dust it off, you get it all starched and get it pressed and looking great. And then you proceed to try to do all the things, be all the things for all the people. And then you give it a couple minutes, you burn out. I had similar experience with the same first professional job I had, spectacular burnout from that. And we start with talking about, self-care, and which is incredibly important. But along the journey to self-care, we forget that self-care is like the last piece, right? When you've already had a spectacular burnout, right? You don't have the tools to even get there. Or if you do, you haven't regulated yourself. You haven't addressed the mindset shifts that lead you to go to the next job. Because I burned out and I thought I had a great self-care routine. I had a massage therapist. I met with my girls and my mind, once a week, and I still burned out. And I think that journey of getting to what's underneath that makes us deny ourselves self-care is important. And understanding that there are people who are in the process of major recovery work where self-care is the end goal, but it's not something they're able to start with right away.
Yeah. That's very
real. It's so real. And I just feel like that feels like that natural progression feels very relatable to me, because I feel like, and I think for a lot of people listening, they're like, yeah, that's what I thought. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get a good self-care routine going. Mm-hmm. And yet there's some lingering discomfort. I'm still experiencing anxiety, or I still have a lot of cynicism. And so to that point, how do you then, now that you had this, I'm focusing on this area as a way to get to self-care, because you're still talking about that, how do you then define burnout, and what are some of the symptoms for folks to be checking for?
Yeah. My kind of definitions of burnout have to do with burnout is this long-term experience of exhaustion, disconnection, and feeling ineffective. Mm-hmm. I like to say when you're showing up burnt out, you're the opposite of your well-rested self in some way, shape, or form. And time has a lot to do with it. In a lot of my workshops I do with groups, I really emphasize that part, because typically we're not showing up our first day of a job, the next day we're burnt out, right? Maybe anxious, tired, nervous, but burnout really has to do with time, that over a period of time, repeatedly feeling exhausted and disconnected and not as effective, that happens over and over again and leaves us in this place of feeling really burnt out.
I love that. The way you said burnout is connected to time, because I think that's really important for people to understand. It's not one instance that leads someone to burnout. It is many instances. And, the way we've talked about this before, it is, to me, these little moments of self-betrayal that you bring in, this self-violation. It's like where your boundaries weren't strong, or you worked a little later than you thought you were this day, and then a little later the next day. It's a cumulative experience. It's not one event. It's so many events that pile up on each other. I just wanted to call it for our audience. The second thing to call that you said that was really powerful is that burnout is the opposite of your well-rested self. Mm-hmm. I think that that's really great. When you think about your most perfect day, or what it would look like to have no stress in your life, and you have this image, and if you haven't, please go journal that, because that's important. The opposite of that is probably 9 to 10 times, maybe close to what we're feeling today, or on a stressful day, right? We're like, the sky is falling. I feel none of these elements in my life. And I think those are two really key ways of thinking about burnout.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something I like to talk about too, in addition to that well-rested version, is also your favorite version of yourself.
Yes.
Right? Those can be one and the same if they're not different. But I think it's so helpful to think about that. I love adding self-compassion in this conversation as well. because a lot of folks are experiencing burnout because, like you were kind of saying, that the word that came up for me was like a self-injury or a self-sabotage that can lead to burnout. But so many people are taking care of themselves, but they're experiencing capitalism fatigue.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Where it's not, yourself that's causing it, but the fatigue of our economic system is also causing folks to burn out. I think that's so important to mention, especially for our audience here, our people.
Absolutely. Burnout to me has always been on two tiers. It is both systemic and individual. Mm-hmm. So there are systemic pressures that cause burnout, and then there's individual. So on the individual level is those self-betrayal moments, those moments of like pushing yourself past the point of exhaustion, the breaking boundaries, the having your identity so linked into who you are that you are unable to navigate your life in a joyful way. There's that bucket. But I think what often happens, frustratingly for me, is that we forget that there's capitalism fatigue, but there's systemic things. The way that we work is not set up for health, for, emotional safety, all those things. It's just not set up for that. And so one feeds the other. As your workplace betrays you, you then learn the tools of betraying yourself, right? As systems betray you, you learn the habit of betrayal is just the norm. And I think it's really beautiful that you are bringing that into the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And we're going to leave it right here for now, because I think this is the perfect place to pause as we shift into what does that mean? All of that mean when you're a Black woman? And I feel like that's what we got to unpack. Well, we've laid out what burnout is. You've talked about your own journey, why you specialize with this with Black women. But what does that mean? Like, what does capitalism fatigue mean to a Black woman? What does the strong Black woman stereotype mean? And how does that fit into burnout? So more to come with Michelle as we dig into what it's like to be a Black woman and be burned out, and what's unique about that, and what we got to protect in ourselves to recover and thrive. So more to come.